Hello, my name is Hao Hongyan. This video will talk about how my project developed throughout the semesters. Before I start develop the project, the first step is to brainstorm some ideas that I want to make, but I don't have much direction by the time. To help me come up with ideas, I create some constraint and direction to help me to get an idea as quickly as possible. Could the game work in 2D and 3D at the same time? Is the idea easy to expand? I quickly wrote some thought and evaluate them, but unfortunately, none of them appeals to me. I have to change the direction of thinking. I started coming up with a question: how can video games push the player to be more aggressive? In Dark Souls, you need to dodge and run away from the bosses that can kill you instantly, but in their latest game, Sekiro, shows some differences in the design. The fastest way you defeat the enemy is to move toward them and use the counterattack. I come up with the first key point here: high risk and high reward. I started to look for similar experience in my life, like my favorite sport, tennis. Tennis always requires you to counterattack tennis ball from your opponent, and this brings some similar experience as in Sekiro. I realized this could be an interesting mechanic if I can hit something back. I start thinking, what if I can create a game that the player needs to defend to attack, like the counterattack mechanic? A game that most rewarding aspect is to move towards the enemy. And just like that, my concept was born with those elements. I'm going to create a prototype that aims to experiment with how to encourage the player to move aggressive action in terms of gameplay. The mechanic was born under these ideas. The core mechanic that the player will use the shield to reflect enemy bullets and use the reflected bullet to kill the enemy. This is the only way for the player to attack and win. For the project, I decided to work in 3D space, not only because I want to learn more about coding in 3D environment, but also it provides more possibility like lasers, light, pathfinding, and more things to expand on. After the project and everything was ready to go, I need a plan for the whole prototype development from schedule to development priority. In that week, we learned about the Moscow document method that can help us to create a plan from the project. I wrote this document in the Notion, and for my project, I think the most fundamental elements are those followings. The first is a core mechanic. I need to create a shield that can bounce the bullet and also can rotate around the player based on the mouse position. Then is the basic movement of the player, which is basically walking on a flat surface. For the first version, a simple enemy with chasing movement is great for me to test the game. Initially, I think the health management is very important, but it was implemented later on. When the Moscow document was complete, I quickly know it is impossible for me to predict what could happen during the development for several reasons. First, there are other cores running at the same time. Then I have little knowledge about C# in Unity, and finally, I could not know whether the impact of iteration would be huge and force me to change the plan entirely. Due to those reasons, agile development is no doubt my first option for the whole development. The mind map is simple. I create a prototype and test the game is working properly. Use the result to evaluate the current state of the game, then make a new plan and design to fix the issue. This process will be ongoing until the project ended or reach a certain milestone. After I developed the first version of the game, the issue of the method to control is very clear. As shown in the video, in this version, the shield is overactive in a scene and the player needs no effort to use it. If the player keeps rotating the shield, they may just be invincible. So what should I do with this situation? With some finding of our similar mechanic in other games like Sekiro and Overwatch, I designed two methods to test the game. The first method is when the player presses the left mouse button, the shield will active instantly, and all the bullets that hit the shield will be reflected. This is hugely inspired by the counterattack in any action game. The second method is to hold on the button, and during this time period, the shield will be active and use the shield energy, like shield in Overwatch game. After implementing both methods, the first test was conducted with classmates. During the test, all the testers' feedback and the gameplay is excellent, and the gameplay is very engaging and some way reached my expectation for the project. The limitation of the first method is very clear. If there are multiple enemies that shoot from all directions, it's almost impossible to not taking damage. Also, the enemy needs smarter to make the combat fun, but the AI is something I try to avoid. Finally, pressing button for each bullet is engaging but also repetitive. By comparison, Method 2 allows me to make more enemies in the scene, and it is much easier for me to expand the ideas around the mechanic. No mentioning balancing the game will be much more easier. So finally, I choose the second method for my control. Beside the testing, I always identify some other issues like the enemy movement speed, and the enemy move straight forward to the player, and also they were stuck together. However, I think one of the most important things I found during the test is the aspect of the difficulty. These attributes will affect on the difficulty of the game. For instance, if I increase the speed of the bullet, it means the player has less reaction time to it, and thus the game is now more difficult than before. The purpose of test 2 is to find out whether the game is balanced and how does the boss fight feel. And the result is that the speed of the enemy and the player is too slow, and the shield is somehow too powerful, and when the players stuck together, you can kill all of them instantly. And for the boss fight is fun, but in stage 2, the bosses is actually getting much more easier. To fix those issues, I look at the feedback and I got this design to come up with a new design. When a bullet hits the shield, it will also decrease the shield energy. For the speed, I increase the speed of enemy, player, and the bullet. To further encourage the player, I added a pickup item that will be generated once one of the enemy died. The key thing I learned about the speed was that I found this formula, which is the projectile speed needs to be greater than the player speed, needs to be greater than the enemy speed. And the reason for that is because the player should be able to dodge the bullet but not running away from it. Also, the player should be faster than the enemy to empower them and make them feel strong. Test 3 is to test everything again like last time to see whether the fixes are working. The result shows a lot of improvement for the control and difficulty. And at this stage, I think all elements of the first priority list was finished, and I started to investigate the subject lasers. Laser is a huge area that I haven't touched before. It can achieve a lot of things like reflection, puzzle button active by lasers, and everything else. I have to even consider using the shield to reflect the laser and make it the puzzle mechanic, but I did not since there is not much time for it. For testing, I developed an enemy with laser generator and rotate to see is it fun to play. The result is it's really fun, and so much potential to expand to my project. Eventually, I only applied the laser to the second stage of the boss fight due to a lack of development time. The brainstorm part is great when the project started. I have successfully generated some ideas that can be easy to test and evolve. On the downside, I get too much restriction to myself and it sometimes makes me less creative. For the ideal selection, I evaluate myself and see which project worked best for me, and the result shows I made the right choice. The issue I have is that I overestimate a lot of things, and the project shows how vulnerable the long-term schedule is. When something goes wrong, the entire plans go down. The testing also had its own issue, which is lack of quality and quantitative data to have a more subjective outcome. The only way to avoid those issues is to do the following: be brave when brainstorming, make short-term goals, investigate more similar games and do more testing. Overall, there is still a lot of potential for this project. Like I mentioned about the laser, it's an interesting area. The game could be a roguelike game with more items or an enemy. That possibly is very promising. I learned a lot from the start to finish. I learned how to make the plan for develop the prototype and the process of making a test that influenced the decision making. The experience I had with this project will help me avoid those same issues and improve my future work with the prototyping. Thank you for watching.